Hello everybody, welcome back to Norwich Talk for another video. Today we shall be again discussing David Wagner, Norwich City's new head coach, who was very recently appointed. I've sat down, I've watched his press conference. Obviously he's had his first game in charge of Norwich, there's been a behind the scenes video, there's been a lot of Wagner content, and now he's appointed and slightly more settled. I think now is the time for sort of a shift in narrative away from obviously who should be the new manager to is David Wagner the right man for the job. I believe the content is there for you all to see, to make a decent judgment, a decent first judgment, if you will, since the appointment. I've just watched the press conference. I'm not sure if I just said that or not. But yeah, I've just watched that and I thought it's time to sit down. I made a few points, or made a few notes, sorry. I'm going to make a few points, put some feelers out there. I'm mostly wondering what you're thinking, but I'd like to place this all on the record, mainly because I think it would prove an interesting exercise in the sense of within, say, 12 months, even less maybe, I could either be proved to be an absolute genius or an absolute wally. We all know which one is the most likely. We'll also be talking about Stuart Webber in this because he's sort of finally emerged from the shadows. It was going to be impossible for him not to with Norwich City hiring a new head coach. So he's made some comments where I might take a side a little bit, but also some where I'm a bit perplexed as to why they were made to begin with. But I want to start with Stuart Webber, ironically, in a video about David Wagner. And I want to talk a little bit about his relationship with Wagner and how I don't think it's necessarily anymore, and maybe I'm saying this because of sort of recency bias, I don't think it was a lazy appointment. Stuart Webber's only experience of David Wagner has been a really positive one. So from that perspective, I think for me, I'm chalking it down to, well, he's had this manager before and he was very successful for him before, so why wouldn't he get him in again? Especially when the reason he left Huddersfield, he told us on this channel, was because he didn't see them as a sort of sustainable Premier League club, whereas with Norwich City, ironically now being relegated twice under him, he saw that opportunity there. So it makes sense, the Wagner hire. One comment that didn't upset me at all, but they aren't the words of a man who doesn't sound very upset. I'm a bit perplexed as to why he is keen on this narrative that he doesn't care what anyone thinks. I think a bit of humility sometimes would go a long way, in terms of keeping the peace. Now, I know he isn't the reason we win, well, solely on a match day. He's not the reason we win and lose football matches, but also, this squad is full of every single player that he's bought and brought through and retained, etc. So he's very responsible for what happens within the season, obviously. But I just find this narrative of, I don't care what anyone thinks, ignore the noise, all that, I find it a bit jarring and a bit unnecessary at this point. It doesn't take a genius to see the state of the club at the moment, in the sense of there is a clear disconnect between fans and the very highest level of the football club. His job, as well as it is ours as well, is to try and mend that. For us, it's about getting behind the team and supporting them. For them, it's maybe let's have a bit of accountability, let's have a bit of humility in the situation and say, look, maybe things haven't been going the way we want them to, but rather than blaming things on fans and being like, oh, well, why do you care? Why are you getting upset? Why don't you just come to the game and support the team every week? I find it a bit odd that he sticks with this very linear narrative and this very consistent narrative for him, that he doesn't care what we think of him. Because at this point, yeah, when you say things like that, why aren't we going to turn on, the board, the manager? I know turning on the manager will be because of their job, but it trickles down, doesn't it? Frustration will leak and it'll be directed. It'll be misdirected sometimes. So I find that really odd. Will it ever change? No, I just kind of wanted to bring it to light and just give my thoughts on it. His comments on Dean Smith being abused, I'm actually not going to comment on that because I find that one really bizarre. If you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. If you don't, just look on Twitter. He said there'll be no action in January in terms of bringing players in. I don't necessarily think this is the worst thing in the world. We need it. My gosh, we need it, but I don't think it's the end of the world if we don't. The question that was actually posed, that has sort of brought out the quotes from the journos, was about, will there be a refresh in January? And I kind of thought, well, hang on a minute, from these headlines that I've seen, you'd think that he said there was no business happening at all in January, but I think the question was phrased more so, and the word directly was used by the reporter as refresh, and that's obviously not going to happen in January. So I kind of think that maybe that's been slightly misunderstood. That said, there's a strong possibility that not much action will be taken in terms of bringing players in. But yeah, that's kind of all for Stuart Webber for now. I'm more than happy for him to prove me, you, everyone wrong, any of his doubters wrong, I should say. But at this point, I'm a bit sick of it, and at this point, talking about Stuart Webber is getting a bit frustrating. But I just thought I'd update the record of thoughts on Stuart Webber, because he's a pretty important figure at this football club. Pardon me, sorry, David Wagner. Let's talk about him. He speaks really, really well. Now, the Norwich City diehard fan in me was very much sort of charmed, I think. It was very sort of David Brent, you've charmed me, as soon as David Wagner started speaking. It was a German accent. It was the idea of drawing a line, and the idea of playing progressive, aggressive football. I kind of heard all these things in quick succession in his first interview, and I thought, right, it's hard not to get excited. And I think one thing to back that up with is Max Aaron's comments after the defeat against Blackburn, a defeat where Norwich didn't disgrace themselves for once, which was kind of nice. Certain players maybe did a little bit, but that is very tongue-in-cheek, I promise, in case that player is watching. But Max Aaron's comments on David Wagner were very interesting. I put a tweet out about it as well at the time after hearing it on Canary Call. He basically said, in short, if you haven't already seen, he wasn't surprised that results dried up and got worse following performances. He said that it was the team's individual quality, or that stroke of quality, that stroke of luck that Norwich were having that were winning them games, and he essentially wasn't surprised that results changed. The first thing he actually said in the interview was, it's basically nice that in the first 2 to 3 days of this new regime, he knows what he's doing, the team know what they're doing, and in his own words, he literally said, we can play like we used to, which he says suits him and a lot of the players. So I think that's very interesting, and backs up not comments, but thoughts, and yeah, comments, I guess, that we've had about Dean Smith and this idea of a lack of a plan. Max Aarons makes me feel at ease. Not that we needed the validation, but it's just kind of nice to hear, and interesting as well that us and at least one Norwich City player are on the same wavelength. Another thing about David Wagner is style of football. Now, at the risk of repeating what I've said in this video and previous videos where I've spoken about David Wagner, this idea that he's coming in as a principled man with a clear philosophy in football really helps. Dean Smith was always quite vague with his answers. His post-match press conferences were always interesting because he'd sort of pick key moments from the game and say what he did. But there was never really sort of a plan. It was always very reactive rather than proactive, which I found to be quite frustrating at the beginning, where it was a new squad of players. It made a lot of sense. It was, well, he's figuring it out as he goes along, but 14 months down the line, we were still asking the same questions of, well, hang on a minute, what's actually going on here? Which is why I think David Wagner is a great appointment. Any manager with a clear philosophy who is willing to be open and transparent about it as well, like David Wagner has been, like Daniel Farke was as well, you're naturally going to get excited. David Wagner sees Josh Sargent as a central striker. That's great. I'm pretty sure Dean Smith did too. He just didn't actually know of a system where he couldn't perfect a system, full stop, but also one where Josh Sargent was playing as a number 9 in the same team as Teemu Pukki. For David Wagner to do that, to get the best out of Josh Sargent and Teemu Pukki in the same team, I wish him the very best of luck. I have total faith that he can do it, but it's no easy task, especially given that I think this group of players are not used to playing with 2 up front. Not many teams these days are they? My final sort of point and question to you, I guess, is promotion a failure, or is no promotion a failure? Not is promotion a failure, of course. For me, no. I don't think sort of no promotion is a failure at all. We've sort of said on this channel time and time again, when there's a project to believe in, we'll believe in it, we'll be patient, we'll be kind, I guess, will be lenient in terms of judgment. After a match, during a match even, you'll say what you see, but when you look at the bigger picture, the tone has shifted drastically from under Dean Smith. It was he seemed to be biding his time every week. I don't really know how, and it was always like, well, what are we actually believing in terms of a longer term future? Whereas now, the sort of philosophy of football is the first thing to nail. Same with Daniel Farke. It's really hard to not draw comparisons. It's basically impossible, and that's all right, by the way. That is perfectly fine. So let's not get our knickers in a twist about that. Not that I think anyone would. But the first thing is to nail the style of football and sort of maybe have some fresh bodies, some newly recruited players in as well to suit the system. Again, first season of Daniel Farke, the circumstances were very different. David Wagner is coming in halfway through a season with a squad who have had experience of being promoted twice. But at the same time, the core message, the objective remains the same. And then it will be about, can we, along the way, build a connection between ourselves, the fans, and David Wagner. So the Olays, after a win, I know how personal that was to us and how important that was to us. The transparency and the passion, so to speak, in the press conferences. Dean Smith's press conferences were very dry, and do you know what? That's not a crime. But when you go from Daniel Farke's sort of essays to Dean Smith's little two markers, you think, okay, this is, not exactly fun. Not that press conferences really are fun. Anyway, I'm falling down a spiral of unnecessary thoughts here. But I think in terms of the project and everything, promotion's not a failure, because if by the end of the season we as fans are entertained by the football, we can see a clear style. If financially we have to shift a couple of bodies that we don't want to, but we have to, we understand that. We've done that before at this level anyway. We understand it. We've done it before. As long as it gets reinvested properly, I don't see there being too much of a problem. Now, in terms of reinvesting that money properly, I think we'll be in a bit of not danger, but the task will be a lot tougher, will be a lot greater this time because of the Brexit rules and how they impacted football. Stuart Webber has, not even basically, he's literally said Brexit has killed us in terms of bringing in players, for example, from the German second tier. That was a market that Norwich heavily invested in by their own standards, of course, whereas now they're having to look towards South America, hence Marcelino Nunes, Gabriel Sara, those kind of signings, because of the rules, and it's going to take a bit of time to adapt to that market, which is where maybe I am willing to give a little bit of time. But yeah, I think that is probably everything for this video. I know for a fact in my head there was another point I wanted to make, but I can't actually remember it, so I'll save it for another video. I've had a couple of comments mentioning why we don't do sort of live streams or podcasts anymore. I don't know. I do have plans to do them again, but it's just about picking the right moments. But yeah, that's about as good of as an answer as I can provide for you. I've got to find someone to do it with as well. But yeah, that's all for this video. Your thoughts on David Wagner, Stuart Webber, all the Norwich City gossip and drama. I would genuinely love to know them in the comments. The past few videos have been wonderful in terms of everyone just getting involved in the discussion. You know I love it. So please leave a comment if you fancy it. A thumbs up too would be appreciated if you want to subscribe as well. We're on our way to 2k, as I always say. I don't know why it matters about being at 2k. It's just a nice number. But thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.